I wasn't thrilled when my father initially offered me the job. Working with my family wasn't something I found appealing. Not to mention construction and demolition work never really piqued my interest either. I was more of a tech-savvy kind of guy, and working with my hands in a broad sense didn't really suit me. Not that there was anything wrong with doing that type of work, it was just how I felt personally. I had just started college and I was in desperate need of some form of income. Unfortunately, the town in which I lived had very little in the way of employment. Unless I wanted to be a cashier at a local supermarket, there wasn't very many opportunities. Much to my chagrin, I took my father up on his job offer. My dad had started his own independent construction and demolition company some years ago. With only a handful of employees, he managed to grow this small company into a somewhat lucrative business. After sitting down and speaking with him in detail about the job, I realized it actually didn't sound all that bad. He explained that he mostly needed clerical work done. He needed an extra pair of hands to process paperwork and do some inspections on potential jobs. Ultimately, he'd send me out to these locations, examine the building's exterior and interior, write down a list of things and bring it back. Then, after reviewing everything, we'd send the whole crew out to begin deconstruction. Well, about a week ago, we had received a demolition request to remove a building on the edge of town. When I first saw what the building was, I was instantly snapped back to my youth. The building was for an old Chuck E. Cheese's. For those of you unaware of what that is, it was basically a dining experience aimed towards children. They served pizza, snacks, your basic junk food items, had a truckload of various games with multiple prizes to be won. It was where a lot of kids would spend their birthday parties growing up. I should know, I was one of them. I thought back to the many years of birthday parties I had attended when I was younger. How my friends and I would run around gorging ourselves on slice after slice of pizza, while we mindlessly dropped tokens into the plethora of games, hoping to accrue just enough tickets to win the top prizes on the walls. The building itself was located quite a distance from the center of town. It was constructed in a small strip mall that was surrounded by trees and creeks. As I grew older, I rarely traveled that far out of town for anything. On the small random occasion, I'd see that one store after another would be closed and looking for new leases. It wasn't long until the pizza chain was the last one remaining. I'm not entirely sure the logistics behind it, but I think they were cutting funding to some of the stores and this one wasn't pulling enough business to endure. After my initial wave of nostalgia passed, I felt almost melancholic over the request. A piece of my childhood was ultimately going to be destroyed, and I was going to have a hand in it. My father, not being one to pass up on a work-related opportunity, was quick in dispatching me to the building. My tasks involved me surveying the nearby area for can or dumpster placements, examining the exterior for what type of equipment would be best suited, which I always suggested our largest excavator anyway, as well as inspecting the interior for any potential problems lying in wait. Most of the time, it was just squatters. You don't want to start tearing into a building and potentially injure or kill someone. I figured it wouldn't take too long to inspect the site, so I continuously pushed it off until the absolute last second. It was around 6 p.m. when I finished up a stack of paperwork and hopped in my car. The drive out to the building was a somewhat long one. Between the distance and traffic, I didn't arrive until well after 7. Luckily, since it was summer, the sun was still holding steady overhead. I pulled into the parking lot and noticed the unkempt lot itself. It was full of overgrowth from the surrounding nature, with weeds creeping up through various cracks in the cement. I parked in front of the building and stepped outside. Looking up at the worn sign, it was reaffirmed in my mind that this place, which probably filled children with fond memories, was now dead. I walked around the exterior, marking a few things on my clipboard as I went. I stepped around the left side of the building and saw a slew of mud and dirt that had probably been formed by bad weather. Everything was going well for the inspection. As I mentioned before, I only really do this as a courtesy. I stepped up to the front door, which still had a faded poster advertising games, pizza, and more, with a cartoonish Chuck E. Cheese giving a thumbs up. I pulled open the door, and an almost gasp-like sound greeted me. It was like the building had taken its first breath in a long time. It smelled like that too on the inside. The scent of stale air and mildew filled my nostrils, but I continued. I pulled out a flashlight I keep handy for jobs like this and ventured inside. For the most part, the whole interior had been gutted. Anything worth of value had long since been removed. All of the game cabinets, prize racks, and kitchen equipment had all been taken. All that was left was a faded carpet and a few decorations here and there. I scanned around with my flashlight, making notes as I went. It was clearly shaping up to be your average building demolition job. As I was walking into the main dining area, I heard a noise. It sounded like something small and metallic, clang softly off the ground. I turned to face the direction of the sound, only to be greeted by a large wall of cloth. I was facing the main stage, where the animatronic musicians would come out and perform intermittently. I called out, asking if anyone was there. I thought perhaps a squatter had made this building his temporary residence. I identified myself loudly and clearly, that I was with a construction company and that this building was scheduled for demolition. I figured even a squatter probably wouldn't want to be in a demoed building, much less have the authorities contacted to have them removed. There was no response. I sighed. I made my way around the waist-high stage to the stairs and ascended them. I grabbed a hold of the large curtain and ventured backstage. I was surprised to find this stage was much larger than what I had remembered. I recalled just a few inches of clearance between the band and the edge of the stage. However, this one seemed to push inward for a few feet. The moment I crossed into this area, I noticed a distinct drop in temperature. The warmth from the summer heat outside had been nearly extinguished. I rubbed my arms briefly as I stepped further inward. After taking a few steps, I immediately collided with something hard. I stumbled back a few steps, rubbing my face. Wondering what I had hit, I shined my light ahead of me. Two lifeless glass eyes reflected back at me. Startled, I took a few more steps back. A moment passed before I realized that it was one of the animatronic band members. The dog, to be specific. Their names had all been lost on me. It sat in place, staring at me with a blank expression, gripping a guitar in its hands. I turned and shined my light, and spotted all of the other band members as well. The drummer, the keyboardist, and the hen were all aligned in a neat row. I thought it was odd that Chuck E. Cheese himself wasn't a part of the ensemble. I called out again, asking if anyone was staying on the stage, and that they should probably vacate the premises. But again, I received no response. Then, I heard that same metallic chime. But this time it happened behind me, back out onto the open dining room floor. I peeled the curtain back and saw the silhouette of a large figure standing dead center in the empty room. The whole room was dark, but I could tell right away that something was standing there. I aimed my light at it and saw that it was the Chuck E. Cheese animatronic. It was as if it had been standing there this whole time, but clearly it hadn't, or else I would have walked past it upon entering the room. I climbed down off stage and jotted down another note onto my clipboard. When I looked back up, Chuck E. Cheese had moved. He was slightly closer to me and offset by a few inches. I jumped back and asked if anyone was there. I told them that I would be notifying the authorities for trespassers and that they should leave immediately. It was a bluff, but I didn't know what else to do. I rationalized that the environment and atmosphere had been getting to me, and that I should just leave with the notes I had. I took a deep breath and walked past the oversized mouse. As soon as I got within arm's reach, however, its large hand shot out from its side, grabbing a hold of my arm. I shrieked and tried to pull away, but its grip felt like a vice around my wrist. With a series of clicks and motors whirring, its head began to turn towards me. Its glass eyes looked at me, and unlike its bandmates on stage, these didn't appear lifeless. His mouth began to open, and a guttural grinding noise bellowed out. I yanked and tugged on my arm. I even resorted to kicking the robot's side. The pressure on my wrist was immense, but I kept trying to free it. I managed to wedge my hand under its fingers and pry it off of me. The second I was freed, I sprinted out of the building and jumped into my car. I drove home as quickly and as safely as possible. During the entire drive, I kept checking over my shoulder to make sure it wasn't following me. After what I had just witnessed, I wasn't leaving anything to chance. When I arrived home, I set my clipboard in my dad's office and immediately went to bed. I lied awake for hours trying desperately to understand what I had just witnessed, but I couldn't. Eventually, fatigue took me and I drifted off. I was awoken by my father asking me to get ready for work. He wanted me to accompany him to the site of the demolition. I almost declined, but I couldn't think of a good excuse on the spot. We drove to the site with the rest of the crew and did another final inspection of the place. It was much different with a large group of people this time around. The air wasn't so heavy, and I didn't feel so unnerved. My dad cracked jokes and reminisced about the good old days. He turned to me and noticed I wasn't reacting to any of his jokes. He asked me if I was alright, but I couldn't shake my attention from the empty stage in front of me. As the demolition was getting underway, I stepped outside to get some fresh air. As I leaned up against the wall, trying desperately to catch my breath, I glanced down at the dirt and mud along the side of the building. In the mud, I saw multiple sets of large, unnatural footprints, all heading off into the woods nearby.